I think about background vocals the way I think about movies. The lead actor is meant to be the lead vocal. It's supposed to be the star of the show. And the background vocals are supposed to be the supporting actors. It's supposed to support the lead and just add a little bit more to it. Make it sound better, make it look better. Kind of like Michael Caine in The Batman, making Christian Bale look amazing. That's the exact same thing we want to be thinking about when we think about setting our background vocals up in a mix. And that's what I'm going to do for you in today's video. Background vocals come in all different shapes, sizes, and sounds, but for the sake of this video, we're going to focus specifically on harmonies and sung vocals. I've left some timestamps down below to make your life easier, just in case you want to jump around this video and see each of these different approaches, because I am going to talk about a wide range of things, ranging from setting levels, EQ, compression, and more. However, I definitely think you'll get the most value out of this video by watching the entire thing and absorbing all the little nuggets I drop along the way. By the way, if you don't know who I am, my name's 5Piece. I'm a producer and engineer based in Toronto, and I help music creators like you sound better and get paid for their music. And if you get value out of this video, if you like what you see, and if you learn something, definitely tap that subscribe button so you can see more of my helpful content in the future. Now, I've established several pillars that I like to focus on when it comes to setting up my background vocals and getting them to sit right in a mix. And to show you, I'm going to be using my friend Everything Ocean's song, Rent Free. First things first, let's talk editing. If you have a series of background vocals, chances are they're going to need some additional editing before you actually go in and mix, okay? And you could see, for example, this is one of my backgrounds here, and I have several, but I've gone in and I've adjusted certain things. Maybe I've adjusted specific phrases that are problematic, or more so adjusted timing and tuning. That's a very common thing that you're always going to want to do, not just for backgrounds, but for all vocals. You're going to want to go in and fix these things. And to make this easier, instead of going super deep here, I'm going to recommend that you watch my other video for vocal editing tips. I'll leave a link to it up above right now and in the description below. And that'll really cover some of the main things that you want to focus on editing before you do any mixing at all. To talk about tuning for a second, you're definitely going to want to tune the vocals, especially if they're sung, okay? Doesn't mean that you have to go crazy and have this incredibly noticeable auto-tune sound, but you do want to make sure that they're in key with one another and sitting well harmonically, and there's nothing that's too jarring or standing out. Now, the best way to learn how to tune vocals properly is to check out my other video, How to Tune Vocals with Auto-Tune and Melodyne. Those are the tools that I like to use, but a lot of the stuff that I talk about there will be applicable to most tuning software. So definitely check that out if you want to see how I approach doing that. But assuming you got all the editing out of the way and you're ready to mix, let's talk about the next thing, which is grouping. I like to actually take all of my background sounds, and these are the main ones for now. I'm going to grab them and just color them pink so you can clearly see them. And I like to actually send them to their own group. So I can actually put this here, and I can now take the output of all of these and make sure they go to this subgroup that I've created, which is actually separate from where the main vocal goes, okay? This is going to give you a few particular advantages. First of all, it's going to allow you to process the group as one. You can actually choose to not apply any processing on the individual tracks. Even though I've done that, you can avoid that and simply process the group. I've done a little bit of both here, but at least this way you can sort of treat them as one. This will actually make your workflow a little bit more efficient and allow you to do some more heavy lifting or top-down mixing processes. The other advantage for me is really I like to do this for side chaining purposes. I can essentially put my side chain compressor here and then have a specific vocal trigger this, the lead vocal of course, and ultimately have the lead vocal take priority over these backgrounds, which is what I want. I want the backgrounds to fill in the space and of course add their texture and presence, but I don't want them to completely overtake the record and just drown out the lead altogether, at least not in this case. So that being said, I'm going to take all my tracks here and I'm just going to send them to the same group, so we're processing them all as one. And one additional benefit you have by sending them to this group is you can actually just control the overall volume of everything, at least all of the backgrounds that are going to this. I find that to be extremely helpful because sometimes your backgrounds are just a little bit too domineering, and I'll take them and maybe turn them down by 1, 2, 3, just a small amount, but just enough to allow that lead vocal to shine once again. So with grouping and editing out of the way, let's talk about the real meat and potatoes here, which is setting levels. You have to set your levels correctly, and that's really going to be 80 to 90% of this process, believe it or not. I know we like to think about the micro stuff, the EQ, the compression, all these little processes that we're going to do. Sure, they make a difference, but they're not going to make as much of a difference as this step here. You really got to get that balance right, volume-wise, before you can even do anything anyways. And 9 times out of 10, when we're reaching for something else, like an EQ or compressor, a lot of times you could really solve the issue that you're having by simply just resetting your level, increasing the volume, decreasing the volume, playing with it in some capacity, maybe even automating the volume, but I find that that's really a lot of the work here. Now, I'm not really going to break down exactly how to go about setting your levels, although I will give you a few pointers right now. But if you want to deep dive on how to set your levels in your mix, definitely check out my other video. I'll leave a link to it up above right now and the description below. Now, what I'm using here is relay, okay? So I'm actually using a different technique here. This is actually another technique I've talked about in another gain staging video, which I'll also leave below. But what I'm ultimately doing is I'm leaving my volume fader at 0, and I'm using this as a way to essentially set my volume level for my track, okay? That's because this volume fader happens at the very end, whereas whatever I set it to, anything that comes before it is going to be affected. But by using relay, I'm actually setting my level first, and not only that, I'm able to preserve my volume fader as a last-ditch effort to basically use it for automation, if I'm being honest. At the very end of the process, I can leave it, set my levels here, and then, of course, do any additional automation there. Now, that being said, what you want to do is you want to first identify the sequence of which you're going to go about setting your levels. And, of course, you want to start with your main vocal, okay? You want to have the main vocal set first. That's because it's the most important, it's the lead, it's the thing that should be dominating everything, clearly audible, and you want to make sure you set that first because it's priority. From there, you're going to go into your backgrounds, and you have to systematically decide which one is worth setting first and which one is next from there. So for me, I have this high double on this track, okay? This is almost like a falsetto type of pitch. It's probably a full octave above the main vocal line, and I think it's the second most important. I think I want to put that in first and then build around it, put in the ad-lib stuff and these other backgrounds afterwards. What I've done is, of course, set this first initial level, so I'll play this really quick. You could take a listen here.
I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy, I didn't want to take my voice.
And then the level that we're going to set is this track.
I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy.
Now, on its own, it might not necessarily be as compelling, but of course, when you stack the two of them together, that's where we're going to get the magic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my relay and turn it all the way down to the lowest possible setting here. And you can use any gain staging plugin, by the way. I just happen to be using relay here. I'm going to play this and then just introduce this and try to find the level where I like it, where it's not too overpowering, where it's not overwhelming the main lead, which should be the focus, but where it's essentially just complementing it. Of course, we want to make sure we're not clipping and essentially following the other advice that I've given in my previous vocal volume setting tutorials. So let's do this.
I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy, I didn't want to take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy, I didn't want to take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy, I didn't want to take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want to take my joy, I didn't want to take my toy, I didn't want to take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
That seems to be pretty good. I'm able to just get it. I hear it. You obviously heard me comparing it a few times as well. I definitely like where it's sitting. And again, I don't want it to be too dominant, too leady. Plus, we have to factor in that there are other vocal tracks that we're also going to be bringing in. Now, while I'm not going to do it in this video, I absolutely recommend you do this exact same process, but now for the next most important vocal, right? So maybe the ad-libs in my case would be the next most important one. I'll start to bring that in. Then I'll bring in the next one, right? The next harmony, and just keep going in sequence until I have them all in. And once they're all in, maybe I'll do some additional maneuvering or adjusting, right? I'll go in and just turn a few of them up or down, depending on how they're all sitting together. Because of course, as you set these levels, context is going to change. You're going to have more information, and you might need to readjust them. Don't be afraid to do that. So even though I set this loud here, maybe as I set my ad-lib level, for example, maybe I decide, hey, I can't hear this anymore. I need to now increase the double that I just set. Or maybe I need to do the opposite. Maybe I need to decrease it, but that's okay. Whatever it is I need to do to make it sound better and more balanced, and of course, avoid peaking and just any sort of digital harshness or clipping, as long as I can avoid the things that I don't want and get more of what I do want while setting a good balance, that's going to be the key. Now, after setting levels, you're going to want to play with the stereo field, essentially the width, right? We're going to want to go into these vocals and play with them and essentially have them in their own area of the stereo field. Some people like to save this for last. I like to do this early, and the logic really is this. I want to have my main vocal, the lead vocal, in the center, or as centered as possible. I realize in this case I do have a stereo vocal track. That's what I was provided with, and I didn't convert it because my converter didn't suggest that I do that. But I am, if I go to the relay here, I am narrowing the width a little bit. So I'm keeping it a little bit more focused and concentrated in the center. But If we look at the double that I was just setting and we look at the relay there, I'm actually pushing the width. Okay, I have it set to 27, so I'm actually enhancing it a little bit. And the logic is we really just want the supporting vocals, the background vocals, to be more in the stereo field and less in the way of the lead. The lead should really be concentrated and focused in the center. Really quickly, let's actually just see if I solo these two vocals and I bypass the relay. Let's just see how they sound in terms of the width. Does this width do anything? Does it make the backgrounds a little bit more wide, a little less in the way? And does the lead just come forward a little bit? So I'll play it just with and without.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
Now I do realize there's a slight volume difference there, of course. I do have my double a little bit lower, right, when I put this in, but I still can hear the difference in terms of the stereo image. You definitely hear that things are just sitting a little bit better and they're not in the way of each other. Now, while I am using Relay to do this, it's simply because I'm working with stereo files, and this is just a cool way to enhance width very easily. But of course, you may not have Relay, so you might be wondering what you should do. I would actually just use the straight up pan pots that come with your DAW, okay? So I can actually take my main, and as an example, I've now taken these two vocals and put them right in the center. My left and right channel, instead of being 100 left, 100 right, it's now dead center, and now I have my doubles 100 left, 100 right. Now, of course, with all of your backgrounds, you may have several stacks. Like as you can see, I have 4 different backgrounds here. You may want to actually instead pan them uniquely. So maybe I have the high one 100, 100, but then I'll have the ad-lib one say, 75, 75, right? Now it's in its own unique space, okay? And then I would repeat the process. So each of these are in their own unique space, but I would mirror them unless you want them to be a little bit more dominant on one side. So for example, if this is 100, 100, but then if I take one and put it 50 on one side, but 100 on the other, well, now it's going to be a little bit more dominant on the left, right? Because it's still leaning heavily towards that way. Overall, you definitely just want to focus on taking your background vocals and moving them more into the width of the stereo image, while at the same time keeping your main in the middle. However you execute that, it's more about just the thinking of it and the methodology of doing it rather than how exactly you achieve that. Next up, we have EQ. When it comes to EQing background vocals, you want to approach this like you would EQ any vocal. It's the exact same process. You want to go in, you want to treat resonances and harshness and any kind of problems that are appearing, but at the same time, you want to sweeten and make it sound good, right? You got to find that medium where you're fixing problems, adding a little bit, and ultimately getting it to gel great with the other sounds that are combining with it. Now, in this case, when it comes to backgrounds, I actually like to apply a low cut filter and generally filter out quite an aggressive amount. In this case, I'm filtering out almost 200 hertz on this particular vocal sound, on this background vocal sound. And the reason why is because as this is just one sound, it may not necessarily be as big of a deal, but if I have 4 backgrounds stacking together, all with a lot of information in the lows, well, now this low end stuff is just getting maximized. And that's not going to be a good thing. It's going to lead to a very muddy, bloated, unclear type of sound. So what I like to do is I like to actually thin all of these vocals out, all the background vocals out specifically, and ultimately use my ears, of course. I'm not going to go too crazy, but just filter out enough of the low end to the point where it sounds clean and I'm not getting that overwhelming low end sound that I'm talking about. Again, this is a vocal. We don't really need that low end like we would on a bass guitar or on a kick drum. So that being said, let's actually hear what this frequency is. I'll just solo this. I'm not going to lie, it's actually quite a bit of important information, or at least it would seem that way. But when I actually take this out and put it in, let me get rid of all the bands.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
Now, if it was a lead vocal, this probably wouldn't be a great idea. But because this is a supplementary vocal, it's great, right? So let me actually show you in context with just these two soloed.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
Just leads to a clearer, less overwhelming sound. Now, in addition to filtering, I'm also getting rid of specific resonances that are problematic, at least to my ears. And I find that on average, I'm usually getting rid of something in that low mid, that 200 to 300 area. This is usually responsible for mud and lack of clarity. Similar to the lows, I'm usually doing some sort of reduction in that area, especially if it comes off as problematic. At the same time, I'll usually do some sort of other reduction in the high end. Sometimes it's in the sibilant area, like 4, 5, 6, 7K, depending on the vocalist. this. Sometimes it's higher. Sometimes it's 10 or 12K if it's just a little bit too sizzly or airy or just harsh in some sort of way. You ultimately have to decide where the problem areas are for yourself, and I think that my EQ video will definitely be helpful if you need some more insight on what you should be focused on reducing. Of course, we're doing this uniquely. We're doing some specific cuts that are unique to this vocal, but we should also do some strategic enhancements depending on the track. You don't always want to do this because this could create even more congestion, but what I like to do is sort of sweep around and find an area that really enhances my background, usually in context with the lead, and of course end up enhancing that or boosting that area, and maybe even detracting from that area on the lead depending on how it goes. Okay, so let's actually do that together right now.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
So this boost around 7700 really adds a little bit of shine, and it should communicate the point. Sweep around, find a unique area to sweeten, and of course make sure that it's not creating too much congestion. And finally, I've talked a lot about reducing the problems and filtering on the lows, but what about the highs? It may also be a great idea to filter out the high end, at least a little bit, okay? You don't want to go too crazy here because there's a lot of intelligibility, but you could probably stand to lose upwards of 20K, okay? 20K is usually the end of our hearing, or like the peak of our hearing, so to speak, unless you're superhuman. And anything above here, you're not really going to be able to hear that clearly. It's usually clicks and mouth noise. However, if you do roll off too much, you are going to lose that intelligibility. So let's just do that real quick as well.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy. Noise, I'ma keep making noise.
Very subtle, almost not even noticeable, right? That's what we want. We don't want to be cutting too much, but we do want to just tighten, sculpt, and focus the sound into a specific area. After EQ comes compression. Not always. This is not my commentary on which should come first, but in my case, what I like to do is EQ first and then do some compression to even out those reductions and harmonic differences that I created. Not only that, the whole intention of a compressor is to reduce dynamic range, is to bridge the gap between the loud stuff and the quiet stuff, right? And you could see that vocals in general, like this background, are very dynamic, right? You have, louder moments and then some quieter moments with the volume trailing off to nothing, and then a louder moment going back into a quieter moment, and then gaps of, silence or maybe room noise, whatever. But all of these different parts of the vocal, specific phrases, specific words, they're not always the exact same volume, right? You could tell even myself, I could talk really loud and then I could get really quiet, right? It's going to vary at times, and a compressor helps bridge the gap there. Now, we're ultimately using this compressor for that reason. We want to reduce the difference between the loud and the quiet, and at the same time just allow the vocal overall to be easier to hear, really. We just want the background to be clearly audible, to not poke out too much, to not commandeer or overtake anything, but just to be clearly audible to the listener. So what I like to do is I usually like to have a 2-to-1 ratio. That means for every 2 dB that goes into the compressor past the threshold, 1 comes out, effectively cutting the loud stuff in half. I'm going to have a slower attack so it's fairly transparent, and a faster release. This will make it a lot less noticeable and a lot less aggressive sounding. I'm going to, of course, set my threshold to achieve a certain amount of gain reduction, usually about 1 to 2 dB for a transparent result, and then I'm going to add 2 dB of gain. And by the way, if all this went over your head because I'm explaining it quickly, check out my other video, How to Compress Vocals. I talk about this a lot slower, a lot more in depth. It'll be a lot more helpful for you. That being said, let's just see what I'm doing here. Let's focus on a specific section, and I'll play it with and without this compressor, and I'll do it soloed with the main.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
Very interesting difference there. You see that we're getting upwards of about 2 dB of compression. Not always, but fairly consistently. And of course, I'm adding that back. It's definitely making this vocal easier to hear or perceive, okay? It's obviously combining with the lead, and we're still getting the presence of the lead, but I'm actually getting more presence out of this background as well at the same time. It's just helping it sit better in the mix. So let's kick it up a notch with compression and talk about de-essing. Now, this is not always going to be something you need to do. It's really going to depend on your vocal and the performance, but if your vocal has a lot of sibilants, a lot of S's, THs, CHs, anything that's got that harsh texture to it, you're going to want to use a de-esser, okay? You can definitely put it towards the beginning of the chain. There's not a problem with that. I like to do that quite a bit, especially if the problem is right away. Like if I'm not even doing anything to my vocal except for setting a level and the S's are already poking out, I'll put that de-esser on pretty much right in the beginning of the chain, okay? Before I do any EQ, compression, anything else, because I want to just treat it there, right? However, sometimes it's not a problem right away. Sometimes you do a few things. You do some EQ, some compression, and then all of a sudden it makes itself known. Well, that, of course, is when I want to go in and then use a de-esser. And that's how I'm going to treat it in this case. Now, you could use a traditional de-esser for this, but I'm actually going to use a multi-band compressor. Why? Well, a de-esser is just a multi-band compressor, but focused on a specific range. The multi-band compressor is a little bit more flexible because I can maybe go into other places that the de-esser is limited and cannot go into. That being said, you're going to set this up the exact same way no matter what you are using. So I'm going to find the sibilants first, okay? So I'm going to play through this and I'll solo this vocal, I'll solo this band, and I'm going to just try to find where there is a problematic S frequency. So somewhere around here, I got between 4,500 and 13,000 roughly. You could hear that there's only a few problems, but you definitely hear that there's an S and it's poking out a little bit. So now that I have that, I'm going to set my range to reduce this area by, let's say 2 dB, okay? So 2 dB is the most amount of volume I could lose at a given point. I'm going to leave my attack and release fairly quick at this stage. I'll also leave my ratio at a 4:1. You may not even have access to these parameters depending on what you are using, but because I have this multi-band, it's obviously the reason why I like to use this multi-band. It's giving me a lot more flexibility. In fact, this is something I talked about in my recent video, why multi-band compression is better than EQ. Check that video out if you haven't seen it yet. That being said, let's play this. I'm going to now reduce my threshold and of course get a little bit of gain reduction on this band and hopefully smooth out that problematic S.
I didn't want in my joy, I didn't want in my toy, I didn't want in my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want it. They wanted my voice. I'ma keep making noise. I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want my joy. I didn't want my toy. I didn't want my voice. I'ma keep making noise. I'ma keep making noise.
So you can kind of hear the difference, right? I'm just smoothing it over a little bit, and if you need to push it more, if it's still too loud, even with a 2 dB range, well, then you can obviously extend the range and get more gain reduction out of that. I just obviously recommend you be careful here because you could definitely really negatively impact a vocal by over compressing or over reducing an area with a de-esser. And if you do want to see more, if you want to learn more about how to use a de-esser, check out my other video, how to use a de-esser on vocals. I'll leave a link to that up above right now and the description below. It'll help you figure out exactly how you should be setting this up, whether it's a lead, a background, or something else. Now, I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about effects. And for me, certain effects always find a place on my backgrounds. However, this is very situational. Sometimes my backgrounds are bone dry and have nothing, and just the lead is affected. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the lead is not really affected at all, and the background is dripping in reverb and delay, for example. Now, for me, I find that I'm almost always going to add some sort of reverb. I like my plate reverbs, and that's what I'm adding to this particular vocal sound. There's a few benefits to adding the reverb, okay? Of course, we're going to be adding the ambience or the room that vocal is now sitting in rather than having it be just bone dry. The other benefit, though, is that it can help push the vocal more into the background. So if I just solo this and get rid of the plate, let's listen to what this sounds like without it and then with it and see if it just feels a little bit more pushed into the background and not so front and center. I'll do it soloed and then I'll put the actual main in.
I didn't want my joy, I didn't want my toy, I didn't want my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I didn't want my joy, I didn't want my toy, I didn't want my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
So now let's put the actual vocal in, the main.
Want take my joy, I they want take my toy, I they want take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I they want take my joy, I they want take my toy, I they want take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise. I they want take my joy, I they want take my toy, I they want take my voice. I'ma keep making noise, I'ma keep making noise.
By adding this reverb onto this background, you're just pushing it more into the background. You're not really hearing it as clearly necessarily, but it is adding the ambience that we like, that floatiness, so to speak. And again, it's not allowing it to interfere as much with the main, if that makes any sense. So I like to use reverb for that reason. Push it more into the background and of course add that vibe or feeling that we're after. You might be wondering, what about delay? Delay is definitely something that I like to use as well. I don't believe I used it in this track, at least not on my backgrounds, but you can certainly go in and delay the end phrases or some aspect of the background depending on what you want to create. Usually we're using delay for a pattern, and just like using a delay on a main vocal, you need to have room for that pattern to be heard and felt. In fact, if you guys haven't already watched my other video, 10 vocal delay tips, check that video out because that's really going to break down the best way to approach adding delays to anything, whether it's a lead or a background, and I'm certain that by watching that video, you'll be armed with exactly what you need to add some really cool effects to your vocal tracks. So let me level with you. There's a lot of stuff here that needs to be covered when it comes to making background vocals sound good, okay? I've really hardly scratched the surface. I've done a lot of top level stuff here in terms of describing what I do, but there's definitely things that I've missed. I didn't really talk about automation and how to manually go in and edit your volume, because that's something that's really critical that's going to happen towards the end of your mixing process. But I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, please tap that like button until it turns blue so you can see some more of my helpful content, and that's so others can discover this video as well. And if you're new here and still haven't subscribed, tap that subscribe button, hit that notification bell as well so you can get notified every time I drop a new video. I appreciate you guys for watching. I really hope you found this helpful. Leave your comments and questions down below, and I'll see y'all again on a future video. All right? Peace.
5,